Hello there, and welcome to the Paula Fiscal Show. We have begun a series on finance and entrepreneurship. For today, my special guest is a friend and also a person that has been very, very active in the community. And when I say the word community, I mean directly San Francisco society, San Francisco politics, Ursula Marsten. Ursula is going to show and tell a little bit about the life and times of San Francisco during the 60s and 70s when she arrived. Ursula, can you tell us a little bit about how you did arrive in San Francisco?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. I was actually in Germany, and a gentleman came up to me, and I have two witnesses to this story, and said, in English, would you be kind enough to help me pick out some flowers for my girlfriend? I said, sure, we'd love it. So we went into the florist shop, and I picked out the flowers, and he said, they're beautiful, but they're meant for you. And I said, what are you talking about? So we started talking, and I said I lived in Vancouver for a while, and I've been dying to get to San Francisco. And he said, well, you met the right person. My father is the American consulate in Vancouver, British Columbia. When you go back there, you call him up, and he'll arrange it. And that's how I actually end up in San Francisco, just by picking out flowers on the pretense this gentleman asked me to do it.
What an interesting story.
It really is the truth, and it's actually mentioned in the book that was written about me with the witnesses there, because it's such a story that nobody can actually believe it. But those kind of things did happen in my lifetime.
And you have another story that you can share with us,
of course,
regarding your mother. Tell us a bit about that.
My mother was in the era of, in the 30s and late 20s, was actually a college graduate, which is unheard of that particular period of time. I did not know much about my mother's life until she was close to death, when she told me, she said, I never told you this, but I was part of the White Rose Society. And I actually said, what does that mean? And she explained to me very quickly that she had worked underground, not as much as some of the other college students. She said, didn't you ever wonder why my favorite flower is the white rose? And then, of course, she did pass on a few days later, and I did do some homework on that. And yes, she was involved, not on a regular basis, but definitely on a part-time basis. So in honor of my mother, when I found out the story much later than, I should have known a long time ago, the boutique is called the White Rose Boutique. And my favorite flowers are white roses, and always have been. So, it's just one of those situations. It's a true story.
Let's also talk a bit about how, when you were in Canada, you decided that you wanted to be a swimmer.
Actually, not only did I decide to become a swimmer, what I did not know until I just found a certificate a few years back, that I had already swam in Germany before we immigrated to Canada, and had already won a few ribbons and so on, etc. So my mother insisted that I would continue training, which meant, by the way, every morning at 5 o'clock being at the swimming pool, which was called the British Empire Pool, which just lately was actually destructed, or torn down, I guess, for a better word. And I trained every day there for 5 days a week, went to school, worked in the evening, which was typical of that era when your parents were immigrants or you were an immigrant. There was no help from anybody, and it didn't make any difference what your background is, you worked.
And
that's how it goes,
This city is known as an immigrant city. So can you talk a little bit about some of the difference
of
that
particular era than this era?
Yes.
I walk up and down the street on West Portal all the time, and I see sign after sign where it says help wanted. And I don't see any young people wanting the jobs or anybody wanting the job. I think perhaps, and I'm not going to get involved politically, maybe we make it too easy for the immigrants, quite honestly, that they get help from everybody and they don't even want to get a job anymore. In my days, you didn't get help from anybody. So,
well, let's talk a bit about some of the areas of San Francisco society that you're familiar with.
Yes.
You married And
I
you,
married into San Francisco society was very closed to anybody from the outside world. I married my husband, who literally his mother disowned him from marrying me because I was a divorcee and had three small children. And he was after me day after day. I worked at a restaurant called the Shalom, which is very interesting because I'm German, not Jewish, and this was a Jewish supper club. And there were only two women working there. The other gal's name was Kim Knudsen and myself. And Kim Knudsen became very famous in Norway, wrote her own books. And through her, actually, I was introduced to the King of Norway. Talk about a small world. And she came quite often and stayed with us. And so Louis and I were married.
and Louis, you want to mention a little bit about Louis.
Yeah, well, my husband was sixth generation San Franciscan, and our children are seventh generation, and he was probably son of one of the wealthiest families here in San Francisco. And his father had passed on at a very young age, and so his mother probably decided that I was I'm not sure what the English word is, a money grabber or whatever it's called. And she decided to disown him, which was perfectly all right with us because we did not need her to begin with. But, he was your typical San Francisco.
Well, also there was
townsfolk.
a lot of class systems
course.
here in the
Absolutely.
society
Very much
world
so.
where you had to have been born into it. And since you were an immigrant, you weren't known and you hadn't been born into it.
But then I decided, you're absolutely correct. But what makes them so different than me, seeing that I had been a female interpreter in Germany, I had been an avid swimmer, I know what I could do. All they had basically was a lot of money. That was always my
The accomplished,
my
you
background.
you were an accomplished
Exactly. So
woman
to
here in
yeah,
San
So
Francisco.
to show them off a little bit, my children all went to school at Stewart Hall for boys. My daughter went to the convent, and we lived on the other side of town in an area called St. Francis Woods. So I drove them every single morning while school was on and picked them up every afternoon. Men in those days did not drive carpools, by the way, and there was nobody around from that particular area. So I think I started getting involved with the school system. And, from starting a hot dog day to something else, and all of a sudden, everybody else wanted me in the city of San Francisco because whatever I touched, fortunately, and thank God, really turned out very well.
So in essence, you were what we would call a rainmaker for the nonprofits. You worked endlessly in the school systems to raise money for scholarships, to raise money for uniforms. Your first fundraiser was for uniforms, and
Exactly.
you sold hot dogs at the athletic events. You
Right.
went to over 200 athletic events one year for all of your
All my
children,
different children involved in
because you
different
had
things.
6 children
Exactly.
and
5 sons on top of
five
it.
sons
Yeah,
on
so-
top of it.
Yeah, no
So you
question
became
about it.
familiar with the systems well enough to
To reach out and
to
do
reach
other
out.
things. And people approached me then, from the head of the ballet to the head of the opera to this to that, and I did as much as I could. Most of my events were kept with children, especially one
To
of
help
those-
children.
To help children. And I also became president of the Youth Guidance Center, again, as a volunteer, and to get those little children in a little bit better shape, I think, than, they were getting. So that was, yes, that's how I got involved.
And so you also have a
street
street named after you. It's named the Marsten Lane, and it's the alley next to Stewart Hall at the Convent of the Sacred Heart.
Absolutely correct, and it was quite an honor. And foolishly, if I may say so, I decided, what a great fundraiser for the next auction we had. And if you were the highest bidder, you were allowed to put your name on there for 1 year. Well, this goes back a few years. I'm still waiting to get my lane back.
Uh-oh.
So it is mine, and the argument is always you gave it away. I said, no, I used it to raise money at the next auction. So I'm in the process of getting it back, of course.
That's
because
great.
it's,
That's great.
yeah.
So let's talk about the Seconds to Go shop to benefit the schools of Sacred Heart.
Yes, Seconds to Go started on Sacramento Street, actually. And there was 3 or 4 women, mothers like myself, and we started it. And there were no paid managers. We worked the hours. Then we moved to Fillmore Street, and it got to the point, in those days you didn't have that many Second to Go shops, okay? And
Otherwise known as consignment.
consignment shops or like Goodwill and those kind of things.
Yes.
So to get more merchandise, I myself and a couple of my volunteers offered to clean up other people's basements to get the merchandise. And it's what we did. And I think one of the funniest thing is that I'm at the opening of ballet, and this woman comes up to me. She says, "Didn't I see you in my basement yesterday?" And I said,
As a cleaning
"Yes."
lady, she called
As a
you.
cleaning lady, and she was so shocked. I said, "No, that's perfectly all right. That's what I'm there for. It's what I did." And of course, the picture was taken for the newspaper, and she was shocked. But no, that was my point: cleaning other people's basements, and eventually, of course, Seconds to Go is still there, very well known as a paid manager now, and parents of the schools have to put so many hours in a month, and so that's all changed. But it's a beautiful shop, and yes, we were there at the beginning of it, no question about it.
That you also have a story for us about some of the famous people that you've run into in the city. Some of the names: Peter Coyote,
Yes.
Clint Eastwood, Cary Grant, and you have
Absolutely.
a story about Cary Grant.
Well, I have a great story about Cary Grant. My husband and I, exactly 45 years ago, went down to Panama City through the Panama Canal, and we were in the presidential suite. There was no question about it, and that automatically allows you to sit with the captain at the table. So when we sat down, the captain said to me, "By the way, you're sleeping in Cary Grant's bed." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he had just gotten off the cruise, and so of course he was the previous sleeper in that bed. So in the back of my head, I always had that statement. And we had a lot of racehorses that ran at Hollywood Park. And one year we had the Horse of the Year, and I knew Cary Grant was one of the directors. So we're there, all dressed. It was a black tie affair, and I see my husband talking to Cary Grant. And then he goes like this. So I'm going over there, and he introduced me to Mr. Grant. And my answer to him was, "I have slept in your bed. I should know you." And he said, "If you had, I would have remembered it." So that's kind of a cute story, but it's really honest to God the truth also. So,
And you also have a story about Frank Sinatra.
Frank Sinatra was actually a very good friend of my husband and his family. When he appeared at Calneva for quite a few years, he did go to the Marsten house, which, by the way, was at the North Shore of Lake Tahoe and one of the largest residences. Matter of fact, until a few years back, Oscar de la Renta fashion shows were there always. And so I did meet him, and at first he was not that easy to get along with. But once, in this case, being married to my husband, Louis Marsten, when he heard that, his arms were wide open. He was talking about the Marsten family and blah, 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 blah. And he was a very nice gentleman, a little bit more difficult to get to know. But once he was on your side, you had it made. So that was
And
kind
you
of fun.
also met Elizabeth Taylor. Tell us that story.
But I think she was absolutely fabulous. It sounds like I'm making these stories up, but they're really true. Elizabeth Taylor, at the moment I met her, it was the City of Hope event here in San Francisco. She was very large. I don't know if everybody remembers that. She had one time when she was married to the senator, she put on a lot of weight. It was 250 or 300 pounds, quite honestly. People forget this, but it's the truth. And Jane Russell actually took me over to her and introduced me to her.
The original Jane Russell.
Oh, yes, the original Jane
The movie
Russell,
star.
because I did a lot of things for her with Rape. And and I have to tell you, the eyes of Elizabeth Taylor, unless you see them yourself, they're really, truly violet. Unbelievable. And I said so, and she said to me, she says, "You're pretty good yourself." So that's
Wasn't
kind
that
of, yeah,
great
so that's
that
kind of
she
cute. So
that
she's very
she
generous with her
acknowledged
comment.
you
Yes,
right away?
absolutely.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, so
And talk a bit more about the fundraisers that you held that not only had silent auctions but had live auctions and had casino-like type
gambling,
events.
casinos, we did a lot of that, which became very fashionable. Not so much now anymore, but it was. So you actually bet with what we call play money, but whatever you won, you're able to take that money then and go purchase a prize that had been donated. But I also started the Christmas tree fantasy here in San Francisco, and you'd come to the event and you would bid on one of the Christmas trees that had been decorated either by Tiffany's or Gums or one of the major, major department stores of its days, including I. Magnin, etc., etc. Then we did also, for the Young Performance Theater, we did a Halloween theme where actually the pumpkins started speaking to you long before the computers got involved. And my own daughter, actually, she was 9 or 10 at the time, rode a small Mercedes, and I'm not sure what the English word for it is, but it was a miniature Mercedes, so a toy Mercedes, down the runway, and it was open to bid on. and somebody bid on it and gave me $8,000 for it. And I think the item was maybe worth 800 or 900 at the time.
That's wonderful.
So that was great. Yes. So we did reach out to various things, but at the end, it was always something to do where you can make money.
Right, to raise money for a charity.
No
and
question about it.
you also were on the board of Sacred Heart for many, many years. And so when your daughter graduated from high school, you did what?
Well, what happened was that you have 8-year membership as a trustee, and they extended it for 2 more years because my daughter was ready to graduate in 2 more years, and they wanted me to give her the diploma personally, which was quite an honor, and which of course I did. So, yeah, that was very nice. That was probably one of the most important. I've been on many boards, but I think that was one of the most important.
That was a
boards,
significant
absolutely.
event in your life.
No question about it. So
now let's talk about Albert Morch.
Albert Morch was, in the old days, you had a society editor in the mornings. It was Pat Stager, Francis Moffat, or whoever it was. Then you had Albert Morch at night. I really don't know when all these columns have disappeared. They're no longer in existence. I did hear maybe.
And this wasn't that long ago. This was only in 1979.
Yeah, I know, but still, society columns
ages
are
ago.
Ages ago. And I think he's still alive, if I'm not mistaken, but he's retired. And all of these individuals that wrote the column every single day, wrote every single
daily.
event.
So they would do nothing but go to the events.
Absolutely.
And write about them.
Exactly. And so one day I'm looking at, the paper, and I thought, oh my God, what is this? And he was very kind to vote me one of the most beautiful women.
One of the 10 most beautiful women in San Francisco.
And it was kind of embarrassing at the
and
same
Ursula,
time.
You were in the top 3.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. But at first I thought, oh my God. But then afterwards I thought, well, if he thinks so, why not? I'll accept it.
There you go. And you also had a big event March 25th at the 68th Annual Academy Awards. This was an award that was presented to you. The big winners were St. Luke's Hospital and the Mill Valley Film Festival, who benefited from the proceeds of a simultaneous Academy Awards gala at the Sheraton Palace Hotel. And tell us about that event.
Basically, it was sort of a copy of the actual Oscar Awards, of course, in Hollywood. And there was a gentleman by the name of Peter. He's passed on in the meantime, too, and I really forgot his name, but he was very responsible for me doing this, and was run exactly like the Oscars would. We had somebody come on the stage, open the envelope, et cetera, and then, the money was given to the various people that were involved in that. So it was a beautiful evening, and we all thought we were in Hollywood.
And you also got some special awards. So there's one right here on the table that you received, and you were the second woman that have received this.
And as far as I know,
tell us a little bit about that.
Nobody else, even now, and this is years ago, received this.
But let's tell the name first. Yeah. Let's tell the name.
How about you reading it for me?
And the name
is so much better than I am.
The St. Madeleine Sophie's Barat Award in 1987. You got this award. Yes. So tell us about it.
I'm the only, besides Dianne Feinstein, I'm the only one that's ever received this award. And honestly, I think they probably ran out of awards, perhaps, because they'd given me every award they could think of. And this is a special award that in the whole United States.
So instead of pay, you got awards.
I got awards. Never saw a dime. I paid all my own tuitions. I think people thought I'm getting tuitions for free. No, did not exist. And, no. So this award was quite an honor. And, I'm very, very happy to have received it.
And tell us a little bit about the L'Italia Americano event that you had at your home.
That was kind of interesting. It was for the Italian Museum, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
It was held at my house.
Museo Italo Americano.
Yeah. And it went fine. It was more to involve the neighborhood. And it wasn't as successful as I thought I would like to have it. But
you're talking about money raised, and you had the Rainmaker signature for your special events, so you always like to make thousands and thousands.
Exactly.
In fact, you made over $2 million for charities, probably more.
Honestly,
and that was then, which means that money has been inflated.
And that's why I think it's so silly when my husband and my children, when I decided to open up a little boutique, which, of course, you're aware
Let's talk a little bit about the boutique. I remember meeting you when a friend of mine, Giovanna Rivetti, who was a film commissioner in the the late 80s,
Right.
and when Willie Brown was mayor, And she said, "You have to go to the ambassador's ball." And I said, "Well, what is the ambassador's ball and why do I have to go?"
Right.
Well, I learned the reason I had to go is because I had to write a big check, otherwise I couldn't go.
Of course.
But
Yeah.
she was very clever about this. First, she got me all excited about the dresses and what to wear and who was going to be there and what kind of auctions were going to take place. And the whole thing was for cystic fibrosis.
That's correct. Absolutely. Yes, I didn't know you actually, quite honestly, that you were there.
Yes,
at
I
the
was
time,
there.
yeah.
I have pictures to prove
Yeah.
it.
Oh my God, that's really fascinating. I love it.
Those
Yeah.
and also I met you when you did a fashion show for the I believe the girls of Italy.
I'm sure you're right. I do fashion shows quite often.
And when you did that fashion show, I ended up buying a leopard jacket, a leopard hat with a leopard purse. I mean, of course, I never really had any place to wear that, but it was such a wonderful ensemble
Oh, thank you.
that I
Thank you,
thought
thank you.
I had to have it. I just had to have it. And ever since then, I've been going to the White Rose Boutique, which is your shop. Now, tell us when you started that.
Well, actually, in 1990, I decided to have my children were out of college, of course, by that time, and getting married, etc., etc. And I wanted money of my own, so I could do what I want with it. And my big thing was to travel around the world, and I mean not just see exclusive hotels, to see the different countries, the bad and the good. And I needed money for that, and so I told my husband I would open up a little boutique, and they'd Mom, you've never worked. I said,
And
never
in
worked.
those days, that's the whole
Exactly.
issue, is that women weren't really expected to work,
Nope, absolutely
and
not.
certainly to do a startup.
Exactly. And
It
I
was-
opened up in 1 week.
It was
Yeah, the store was empty, and I just said, they were laughing at me. And so the final words from my husband were, whatever money you make, you keep. But if you lose, don't come crying to me. And I said, that's the deal. And needless to say, I've never been ever back to him to ask for anything. And it was great because the first 10 years or so, as we all know, San Francisco was known as one of the best dressed cities, and people were still dressing a lot. It's not quite the
and by
same
dressing
anymore.
you mean we were
Top to
wearing
bottom.
hats,
Absolutely.
we were
Gloves,
wearing
purses,
furs,
the whole
we
thing,
actually
yes.
wore high heels and gloves,
Absolutely, yes.
and the hats were a big deal, I remember,
Yeah,
in your
very
shop.
much so. And that, of course, no longer. But I love doing it. As I said, I traveled all over the world, had 3 employees. And yes, it was very successful. And I'm still there.
And you held also a lot of events at the Mark Hopkins. You
Very
became
much so.
friends with all of the help,
Yes.
in particular a person by the name of Jack.
Yes, what's very interesting, because I did so many events besides the schools, etc. And I did use the Mark Hopkins a lot because I happen to like the ballroom there. But when you want people to do something for you, you have to be good to them. And I was nice to everybody, from whatever the bellboy, the this and that, and the word got around, I think, quite often. And yes, I was a generous tipper, there was no question about it. But my last event there, and I've spent the night before I was there, was so interesting because I come down in the morning, and by my car, which was always parked in front naturally, there were all these men standing there in uniforms, dressing the Mark Hopkins. And I said, what are you guys doing here? Well, they had honored the doorman by the name of Jack.
Who had
at a
been there for
30 years.
30 years.
And they honored him with a black tie affair, or a black tie dinner, if I may say. And they asked him, who is the most famous celebrity that you've enjoyed waiting on at the Mark Hopkins? He said, nobody like Mrs. Lewis Marsten. So that was a great compliment to me. And I was going to tip them, and they did not accept a dime.
Yes, he had
So
said
that's-
something along the lines of, never mind about those other famous people. My
Exactly.
favorite person
Exactly.
is
Ursula
Mrs.
Marsten. Yeah.
Lewis
yeah.
Marston.
So, no,
That's
it's very
that's
true. And I think it's
a good
beautiful
story.
And I thought that's why I wanted to put that in the book when they interviewed me. Because
And in 1991, you received an award at Bimbo's for your 25 years of service. And it's a big crystal. We're going to put that on the end of the video so people can take a look at that. And
Lifetime Achievement Award, yes.
yes, and so what we want to do is maybe show a copy of the book. Of course, never mind about the tags I have here all lined up to go over the highlights of Ursula. But And this book was a consignment. No, it was commissioned
It was not commissioned by me.
by
The
Sue
women, yeah,
Quirk, but
she
Sue
approached
Quick
me.
is a
She's a writer.
writer.
Yes, and there were two women actually involved. The other one dropped out, and Sue Quick continued it. And actually, she sat down with me. I had a lot of newspaper clippings, not all of them, but a lot of them.
Right.
And she chose what she wanted, and she literally interviewed me like you're interviewing me right now. And because I said to her, I said, be sure to put it in my words.
And the book is
you know,
beautifully done.
I think it's
like
done very nicely.
a memorial. Sometimes people do self-publish about themselves,
no.
and this particular book was done on you and the work that you've done
Exactly.
in the community and in San Francisco. So we want to acknowledge you on my show here
you.
for all of the work that you've done in the charitable respect, so that you indeed are a finance and entrepreneur in San Francisco. So we want to thank you all for watching. There's going to be a final comment I see from my friend Ursula.
Of course. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Your famous
everybody
words.
in
So
life.
these are the
Yes.
words of advice that you give to our viewers or young
Absolutely,
people,
all young people,
young women in
especially,
particular
yes.
that may want to open up their own shop. So it's important that they
I agree.
hear that it's critically important that they do what they want to do, and that especially if they're passionate about it.
That's the most
It will
important
become
thing. You can't
a
give up
success.
right away. Yes, thank you.
And
Thank you,
so,
Paula.
thank you so much for joining us with our special guest, Ursula Marsten, who has been a fixture here in San Francisco for many, many years. And if you want to meet her and see her, her shop is in the West Portal area, the White Rose Boutique. And now you know the story about the White Rose Boutique and Ursula Marsten. Once again, our show airs on Sundays at 3 o'clock p.m. I also upload to YouTube. So if you have a question or an idea that you'd like to explore, just send me an email at paulafiscalshow@gmail.com. I also have a Facebook page, so like us on Facebook, and a Twitter the Twitter handle is Paula Fiscal TV. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. And where there's a will, there's a way. That's what Ursula says.